We are a citywide nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and protecting the historic built environment of Washington, D.C. since 1971. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge some of DCPL's top sponsors whose annual financial support helps underwrite public programs like this one today. They are Denton's, Douglas Development, Antunovich Associates, Atlantic Refinishing and Restoration, Bayer Blinder Bell, EHT Traceries, and KCE Structural Engineers. Many thanks to you all for your dedication to historic preservation in DC. This program is also brought to you in partnership with Palisades Village. Palisades Village is a membership-based, volunteer-driven, aging in place community for adults in the Berkeley, Kent, Foxhall, Palisades, Spring Valley, and Wesley Heights neighborhoods. Palisades Village is a community of caring friends and neighbors in the Palisades area of Washington, D.C. They give older residents access to tools, services, and social events that enable them to build strong relationships with their neighbors and remain in their homes as they age. So we thank them for their partnership and a big welcome to their members. And I will put their website in the chat soon. You can learn more about them. Also, just a quick note about how today's program is going to work. So please use the Q&A box found at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions of our speaker today. I will collect your questions following the showing of the tour and verbally ask them of Gordon following the video. And for those of you joining us on Facebook Live, DCPL's Director of Development, Kelly Knox, will be monitoring any questions that you all might have and will pass those along to me as well toward the end of the program. So with that, I'm so pleased to introduce you all to today's guest. Gordon Kitt grew up in Houston, Texas, in a house built by his parents in the early 1960s in a modernist style inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. After obtaining his AB in biochemistry from Columbia University and MA in molecular biology from the University of California, Berkeley, Kitt moved to Washington, D.C. to attend law school and has lived here ever since. Kitt's career as a patent attorney spanned 3 decades at the same D.C. boutique patent law firm. He came across 3020 University Terrace Northwest during his search to buy a house here and has lived in the home for over 20 years and is its longest tenant. And we thank him today for inviting us into his home and garden. So, very briefly, before I begin the actual tour, I just want to provide some background about the house and its designation. So Gordon reached out to the DC Preservation League regarding his property in 2017, and we worked collaboratively with him on the nomination since that time. And in October 2020, DCPL and Gordon filed for its consideration. On February 25th of this year, the Historic Preservation Review Board unanimously voted to add the home to the DC Inventory of Historic Sites. And very exciting, just recently, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places on April 30th. So 3020 University Terrace Northwest, or the Bazelon-McGovern House, can be found in the Palisades neighborhood. It is a 2-story modernist house accented with traditional Japanese architectural elements, as you can see here. And that's just some of that basic information. It was built in 1957. In modernist style, and there's the timeline. So the home meets the following criteria that you see here as required by DC and the National Register. So basically, these are the characteristics that made it eligible for designation. So the residence is significant under DC Criterion C and similar National Register Criterion B for its association with 2 individuals who are significant to the development of the nation as well as DC. And so it was designed by Jean-Pierre Trouchaud and constructed in 1957 as the family home of David L. Bazelon, the highly influential chief judge of the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And in 1969, the house was purchased by Senator George S. McGovern, a Democrat from South Dakota, and his wife, Eleanor. During the McGovern's family's the decade-long stay in this home, George McGovern ran for president as the Democratic nominee during the 1972 presidential election. And during his quest for the nomination and presidency, the House was the scene of many political events and key meetings and was frequently pictured in the media. And I will be showing some of those pictures in just a moment. This property is also significant under DC criteria D, E, and F, and Associated National Register criteria C, because it embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, style, and method of construction. It is an architecturally distinguished dwelling that is modernist in style, but reflects the influence of Japanese architectural form. So while this style is quite rare in DC, it does speak to a growing influence of Japanese design in post-war America and the evolution of modernism in Washington, DC. A very special and unique site. So here's just a couple of photos I'm going to run through very quickly. This is a picture of Trouchaud. He actually designed 8 distinctive modernist houses in the Palisades neighborhood, most of which were on Chain Bridge Road and University Terrace. Sadly, only 2 of his 8 designs in the Palisades still stand today, one being Gordon's home and another, which I believe is also on University Terrace as well. And here we have Bazelon, as well as a quote from Alan Dershowitz, who was a law clerk that worked with Bazelon in the early 1960s. And it really kind of shows you the fact that Bazelon did work in his home and he had these meetings as well. So Alan says, "I was there many times. Bazelon had numerous legal meetings with his law clerks and fellow judges in this house. This was during the prime of his judicial career when he was the chief judge and the most influential court of appeals judge in the nation." It really illustrates his time in the home. And also a little bit less professional, this was his family home, and that is him on the porch doing some grilling. And so there you go. And then we move into when George McGovern and his family lived in the home. And again, like I mentioned, a lot of political meetings took place here, as well as quite a few kind of public or like, I can't think of the word, like press conferences, that kind of thing. So it wasn't just his private home, but it was also a very public space as well, kind of, at least in the media. So this is George McGovern with his running mate, Sergeant Shriver, on the porch. Shriver. This is a press conference near the front door of the home. Like I mentioned, campaign meetings also took place here as he was trying to win the presidency. So this is in the living room. And like I mentioned, there was a lot of public events as well. So you had rallies, fundraisers, and other public events. This, I believe, was an auction that was taking place in the backyard of the home. And you can see the porch up top there. And then some photos in newspapers. It was featured quite a bit in local newspapers. This is from the Washington Post. So here on the left, you can see McGovern with his wife in their living room, and you can see like the screens behind them. And then if you look to the right, you can see the original furniture. And Gordon actually shared with me that Bazelon actually sold or gave most of the furniture to the McGoverns. So this was also their furniture as well. And Gordon, correct me if I'm wrong, you also mentioned that the dining room table there was also designed by a Japanese designer, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is the home. Another photo of his wife, Eleanor, with her dog. And you can see the screens in the back and also the fireplace. And then here's a fuller picture of the living room there. So really, really interesting, really wonderful. And so that's the end of my little presentation. But I just wanted to say how exciting it is for DCPL to work with homeowners like Gordon, who are just as enthusiastic about landmarking their property as we are. And it's been wonderful to collaborate with him and to work with him. And we thank you, Gordon, for opening up your home and your garden to us today, and for all your work and all your collaboration with us. But so we're going to start the video now. Again, the tour is pre-recorded, just so you all know. And just as a note, while we were filming, we didn't use a microphone. So just as some advice, you might want to crank up your volume Especially as we move outside, you will notice some background noise, as is the nature of living in a city. There was some construction happening. So just make sure you crank up your volume. We did add subtitles to some parts where that might be a little bit harder to hear, but just so you all know. And if you have headphones, that might also help. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to get the video set up. In one moment.
Hi, my name is Gordon Kitt. I live in this beautiful Japanese house. I've lived here for over 20 years now. I was originally from Houston, Texas, and I lived in a house that was sort of a Frank Lloyd Wright style house that my parents built. And when I went to buy a house in DC, I wanted to buy a very interesting looking house. And I went all around DC and I started going to Maryland. And one day I drove by this house, I saw a for sale sign, and I said, I got to look at this house. While I was working as a lawyer, I had many Japanese clients, so I'd been to Japan many times. And so seeing a Japanese house was very intriguing to me, especially because it had a lot of windows, it had lots of trees, just like my parents' house had. When I bought the house, I discovered that Senator George McGovern lived in the house when he was running for president. While I was a high school student in Houston, Texas, I actually worked on the McGovern campaign, and I actually met George McGovern when he came to Houston for a campaign visit. So it was quite surprising to me that years later, I would find myself living in the same house that George McGovern lived in while he was running for president. So one of the things about Japanese architecture is that the inside and the outside are supposed to mesh. It's supposed to be a clean, even flow between the outside of the house, the landscaping, and the inside of the house architecture. So you'll see as we walk into the house, there are many repeating themes. One of the repeating themes is the Japanese torii gate, which you see here in front of the house, under the alcove. Through the windows of the front living room. It's a 4-panel design of the tree, and when we go inside the house, you'll be able to see the panel repeated on the other side. So these are Fusuma screens, and this is the 4-panel tree repeated 3 times. First here, 4 panels there, 2 here, and then wraps around to the end here. I will show you in a second the original paper that was in the house. These Fusuma screens were originally here, but they had different paper on it, and the paper was 40 years old, it was water stained, some of it was torn, so it wasn't very nice. So when I was in Japan, I was able to get new paper and had the Fusuma screens rebuilt here in Washington with the new paper. So now you can see with the screens open how much light you get in. In the morning, tremendous amount of light comes in because we're sort of facing east. Now, the original paper for the screens is still in the house. You can follow me. I retained the original paper in the garage for the shoji screens, and you come back here and you poke back here, you'll see the original paper that was on the Basuma screens. We'll come back around there. Inside. So a second repeating theme is this medallion, which is taken from a Japanese architectural magazine. We repeated this theme several times throughout the house. This is one of the places. Now, second place is on the tea table in the living room. Okay, it's the same pattern as the medallion. And if you look below, you'll see that there's a torii gate structure supporting the table. But when I bought the house, there was wall-to-wall carpeting in the shape of tatami mats, like this, but there was no wood floor. So when we pulled up the old wool carpeting, which was 40 years old and torn and not very nice, we found that we needed to put a wood floor in. So we added a Brazilian cherry wood floor, and then I had these custom area carpets made to look like tatami mats. Now you'll see another torii gate, one of the repeating themes in the house. This is the original torii gate that was originally part of the house when I bought it. And this is the original paper for the Basuma screens are all in the house. So all these Basuma screens, shoji screens that you see in the house have been restored with new paper. But this was the original paper for the house, and this was used to block off the entertainment section of the house from the back of the house, which is where the kitchen is and the master bedroom was. So this area where the piano is now the music room, but originally it was the dining room. And this partition was actually a very large walk-in closet. And the walls all had wood paneling on them. And there was a built-in credenza here, which had a stereo, it had places for silverware and other things. And now it's the music room. So in the original house, there was a powder room, but behind this wall, but the door was right here, right open to basically the guests. And I said, well, why are we having the door there? Why don't we move the door to the far end? And so we moved the door over, we reconfigured the bathroom, reversed the orientation of the bathroom to the powder room, and we created the see-through going from the powder room all the way back out towards the library. A nice clear line of sight. Now, as you can see, there's another gate structure that we added when I did the remodeling of the house 20 years ago. There's a third gate going to the library. And there's another gate downstairs, which I'll show you in due course. So when I bought the house, this was a dining room. The third owner actually closed off part of the deck. Originally there were sliding glass windows here leading out to the deck. They closed, or they moved these sliding glass doors 10 feet in, and they created a space for a dining room. So I retained the dining room, but I had built a Japanese style table, so you have to sit on the cushions to eat in my dining room. I also have here a wedding kimono, a Japanese wedding kimono, as an artistic element. So you'll see as I open up the shoji screens, the deck, which is Again, if you could just imagine it extended out 10 feet towards where the original sliding glass doors were. So you'll see the medallion structure is also repeated in the dining room table, as well as if you look at the base of the table, you'll see the Torii gate structure, which is repeated in the table, and it's also repeated on the Japanese kimono stand. Now, another element of repetition in the house are cut corners. So you'll see in the glass top floor of the table, the corners are cut. You'll see on the fireplace hearth that the corners are cut. And you'll see in all of the furniture that the corners are cut. I have the furniture handmade, custom made. You have cut corners here, and you'll see throughout the house, all the dressers, the bed frames, all have a similar cut corner structure.
And why is that?
Originally, originally it was because I'm a klutz and I didn't want to walk into sharp edges on a bed.
Okay.
And I said, well, let's cut the corners of the bed. And they said, well, we're going to do it at the bed. We should do it everywhere else. I said, oh, that's a good idea. So originally this room was the breakfast area room. This skylight was not here. And because the sliding glass doors were just behind this area here, there was plenty of light. But when the sliding glass doors got moved 10 feet further out, this was a very dark room. And so when I had the house remodeled, we added the skylight to provide a little bit more light. So this is now known as our gallery space. Now, when you walk into the kitchen, you'll again see cut corners on all the surface structures. So originally, the original kitchen was designed differently. There was a peninsula that came out of this wall and came out to about here. There was a washer and a dryer up here. There was a side-by-side sub-zero refrigerator and a freezer here. The sink was in the corner over there, in the far corner, and the ovens were up against the wall to the right. So there was not the magic triangle that you typically see now in kitchens. So when we had a remodel, we reconfigured the kitchen to make it a little more utilitarian, and we moved the washer and dryer to under the counter. Washer and the dryer. So all very convenient. Kitchen, but it wasn't a dome skylight. It was glass blocks, which is very old-fashioned type of skylight, and they leaked a lot. So when I did the remodeling, we built in a brand new skylight with a dome structure. So as I indicated, the inside and the outside need to mesh. And as you probably saw, the railing for the deck has the same structure as the railing for inside the stairway. Again, we have the Torii gate structure here on the top, in the top corners there. We have another Torii gate here, which shows you screens. Provide some privacy. You have the desk with the cut corners, and again with the structure as in the stairwell and outside. You can see outside the same pattern for the railing. So originally, this was Judge Bazelon's library and George McGovern's library. And when the Bazelons and McGoverns lived here, there was a wall-to-wall bookshelf which actually extended across this closet on this side and also all the way on this side. This window wasn't there originally, but there was a hole for the window. So when we pulled the old bookcase out, we found the actual framing and hole for the window, and we decided just go ahead to pop a window in there to provide more light into this room. This was a very dark room. It had dark wood paneling. It was a man cave, basically. And so we wanted to make it a little brighter and sunnier. So this doorway is originally, there was an interior passageway between the library, the bathroom, which is behind here, and the master bedroom. So this stairway was actually a wall here going straight up, and you could walk privately through the three key rooms, the library, the bathroom, and the master bedroom, without being part of the rest of the house. This gate structure was not here, obviously. This was a solid wall also. So as you go into the master bedroom, you'll see again the furniture with the cut corner. You see the medallion structure over the bed. You'll see again the cut corners on the tables beside the bed, the medallion structure, and cut corners on the frames for beds. So this is the master bathroom. Again, angles, which is what I wanted to put in the house. Something a little more interesting than just straight square boxes with a little angled shower. This window was originally a square window when I bought the house. It was with rippled glass and you couldn't actually see through it. And I wanted to have a round window to repeat the medallion structure. And they were going to frost the window until we looked at it and we said, why are we covering up that window? Nobody can see into the bathroom. It's all these trees, and if you look through the mirrors, you get the great reflection of these Japanese maples, or what you're seeing through the window. And in the fall, the Japanese maples turn bright red and orange and yellow, and it's a very beautiful view through the mirrors, reflecting the view outside the window. So when we decided to tile the shower and the kitchen tiles, so what tile do we use? So the idea that I had was we should have tiles that are called a crackle tile, which looks like the shoji screens. So it's like the interior paper of the shoji screens are the tiles for all the bathrooms and are the tiles in the kitchen. So the house is built on a hill, and we're currently on the main floor. But as the hill goes down, there's another level, which we're going to go see in a moment, which extends from the bottom of the house. It extends out from the hill. So as we go downstairs, you'll see the additional Torii gate leading into what we call the sunroom, or this is the TV room area. And again, we have shoji screens. We have another tree pattern like upstairs. We have on the wall a Japanese no theater mask. It's a devil mask that I got from Japan. You'll again see the table, which is identical to the table up in the living room, except this is a 4-foot diameter table, whereas the one upstairs is a 5-foot diameter. Has the same pattern built into the table, both in the surface of the table as well as in the support structure, looking like a tatami mat. like a Tory gate. You have the same tatami mat style carpeting down here with the Brazilian cherry wood floor. And you can look out into the garden. Originally, this was a solid wall with a small window in this corner, and this was actually a bedroom. This room was about 2/3 of the size. If you look at the beam above you, that would have been where the wall came down. And there was a bedroom here, then on the other side of that beam was a second bedroom, and then a third bedroom further beyond. This wall was actually a bathroom. It was a long bathroom along this wall that you could get into from the bedroom. So when I moved into the house, the garden, which we're going to go outside in a bit, there was actually a swimming pool here. The swimming pool started from around here, this point, and wrapped around to around this point. And you'll see photos of that pool. I'm not much of a swimmer. Pools are not very useful in Washington except for 2 months out of the year. They're very expensive to heat. I wanted a Japanese garden instead. So I hired a landscape architect who specialized in doing Japanese gardens. He actually was trained in Japan, and he built the Japanese garden for me. Brought in the big boulders, planted the Japanese maples, the azaleas, a lot of other things that we have in the garden. So downstairs, in addition to the sunroom and the theater room, are 2 guest bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. So we're going to the first bathroom. Which has a shower with, again, a cut corner angle. You have an angled sink area. And you have a little garden feature with a Japanese lantern and azaleas. There's a spotlight underneath the window, so at nighttime you can spot up this area, and it's a very pretty little garden. So we'll go into the first guest bedroom, and all the bedrooms look the same. We have the cut corners on the tabletops. We have the medallion structure. We have cut corners on the bed frame. We have the cut corners on the custom-made furniture. And unfortunately, it's just a little too early for the azaleas. They're just starting to pop, so you can't quite see them yet. So on the wall are 2 needle points that my mother did. She was very much an artistic person and did a lot of needlepoint and other types of artistic works. And she passed away 30, 40 years ago. And I was home one time rummaging through the closet after I bought the house, and I found these 2 needlepoints that she had done 40 years ago, and I brought them back to Washington, and I thought they went very well with the house. There are 2 more similar needlepoints in the other bedroom, which we'll see in a second. But this is sort of paying homage to my mother.
That's wonderful.
So we'll go into the second bedroom. Which again is like the other bedroom. It's the same furniture, the same medallion over the bed. You have the other 2 needlepoints that my mother did. And if we open up the shoji's here, you'll see that the white portion is the dining room. And that was where the dining room was closed off. So the deck originally went from the edge there all the way through to these windows. But when the third owner decided to build, to close out the dining room, they restructured the surface there. For the second bathroom is here. And again, it has angles. It's very similar to the other. Okay, so we're going to walk along the deck. This is the original decking in the house, which was redwood, which held up very well because it was never got wet. But ultimately, I had to redo the deck because the redwood had kind of rotted out here. And when we redid the deck, we had to redo the railings because it wasn't up to code. You'll see in an original photograph of the house that the railing was much lower and there were big gaps between the runs on the railing, which would be very dangerous nowadays. So we had to have a new railing built up to code and repeated the same design structure, which is in the stairwell of the house and also on the desk in the library. Had the Japanese maple planted here, a lot of azaleas. This was all grass. So we had the pachysandra added for landscaping when I had the garden built. Now this is a cherry tree that 2 weeks ago had this big pink bloom over the top of the house. This cherry tree is probably 60 or 70 years old. It was definitely in the house when the McGoverns lived here, and I think it was probably in the house when the Bazelons lived here. You can see it's now sort of dropping its little cherries at the moment. So you might want to take a look at the garden from the top view, looking down. So the garden is still very early in the season. So you're just starting to see the hostas come out. They're not fully out yet. The azaleas have not blossomed yet. There are other things in the garden that are in the process of coming out. The ferns are coming out. These are Japanese red painted ferns. The hostas all along it. In the middle of it is a red astilbe. You might want to walk along the deck and look at the garden at the top before we go back into the garden. There is a photo of George McGovern with Sergeant Schreiber on this deck, walking along this deck and talking to each other, which you can see. So these Japanese maples were planted about 15, 16 years ago. So in designing the garden, it was explained to me that the small pebbles are a river going through the landscaping. And you have the river stones next to it, you have the big boulders on the borders of the garden. But this is the small area, sort of this winding river that goes to the garden. It's sort of typical of a Japanese Kyoto-style rock garden. Here are the azaleas that are just starting to bud. They should be out in another day or two. This big white field with a red field, and a Japanese maple in the corner. We have a Japanese lantern. We have several Japanese lanterns throughout the house. There's this one here in the backyard. There's one in the front yard. There are smaller ones inside the house and also on the sides of the house. So now we're going to go into the garden. Again, all of this landscaping was added when I bought the house and hired the landscape architect. The compressor for the air conditioners was here, but I had built around it, again, a Japanese gate structure to help hide the compressor. See, some of the houses have already come up. Some of it's starting to come up. It's not there yet. And lots of different planters, different types of objects in the backyard. We have a lot of deer in this neighborhood, and occasionally the deer get back here. Sometimes they jump the fence. Sometimes the gate's left open. And you know when the deer are back here because the hostas are like lettuce to them, and they're all eaten up. Totally destroyed from the season. So right now, we're just coming up and the deer haven't gotten back here for us. Now, that direction is west. So in the wintertime, when there are no leaves on these trees and no leaves on my neighbor's trees, you can actually see Tyson's Corner. Arizona Avenue is just parallel to that area, on the other side of the houses. And again, we have medallions, like inside the house, patio areas that were built by the landscape architect. We also added a water feature. The original idea was to have a koi pond, but the landscape architect convinced me that a koi pond was really just food for fish and food for cats and raccoons, that they would come and eat the koi. So we had this fountain put in instead. Less maintenance and provides the same idea of a water structure, water feature. Well, all these boulders were brought in by the landscape architect. This wall was further out. The McGoverns used this area to park their cars. The pool, which was built by the third owner, McGoverns was the second owner. The pool started around here and wrapped around in a triple shape. So again, you can see the houses are just starting to come out, and they will fill up this entire space in 2 weeks, probably, time.
Okay. So that was really great. Thank you so much again, Gordon. The work that you've done on the house is beautiful. The stewardship has been really wonderful. And we really appreciate you letting us explore your home with you. today. So I'm gonna wait and see if anybody has any questions.
There's one question.
Oh, there is. Oh, let's see.
Carol, basically, why did the Bazelons build a Japanese house?
Mhm.
And the story is, at least from Miriam Bazelon's memoir, is that they visited the Philadelphia Art Museum in 1956, 1957, and at the museum they had an exhibition of a Japanese house that had been reconstructed at the museum. It was a Japanese tea house. And the McGoverns or the Bazelon saw that Japanese tea house, and she decided that she wanted to have a tea house to live in. And so they hired a French architect to build them a Japanese tea house in Washington, D.C. That tea house is actually a permanent exhibition at the Philadelphia Art Museum. And so you can see the original tea house that they had looked at if you go up to Philadelphia.
Great. A question from Kate. I love the living room wall screens. Perhaps I missed it, but who did that watercolor, I think, of the tree?
It actually came from a Japanese store outside of Tokyo, where they make these various screens. They have various patterns, and I spent an afternoon looking through their various books of different possible patterns and different trees and other types of landscaping, and picked this one out.
And then we have a question from Gloria in the chat. She said, "You've changed so much. How did it qualify for preservation?" So from my understanding, it qualified, the exteriors are the things that have been designated, so not the interiors. Although, Gordon, you did keep like the original screen, the original, like the wall screens, the one screen leading into the kitchen area. So yeah, just for clarification, everybody, the exteriors are what are like officially designated.
Right, and there weren't that many changes made to the exterior.
Yeah, exactly.
And as far as the interior design changes were actually made to maximize the Japanese look. It's even more Japanese-like now than it was when I moved into the house.
Right. Okay, we have some other questions in here. One is from Elliot. So what is the other house on University Terrace built by the architect? I don't have the exact address at the top of my head. I don't know, Gordon, if you do. If it's on your
I don't have the address, but it's the Mullet's house. It's a green house on the left side of University Terrace going down.
Okay, so a question from Kate, which I think I answered, but so is the interior considered contributing to the significance of the property? If not, have you made any provision for future owners to preserve the interior features? Again, it is just the exterior. I don't know of any plans about adding those provisions for the interior. I don't think there are any.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah.
So somebody who buys the house for me when I die can, in theory, gut the interior and make it non-Japanese-like if they want to.
Yes, but they can't do anything to the exterior as per the designation. Okay, so Carol asked, how did you prepare yourself for rehabilitating your marvelous home? And did you have an architect and or decorator?
I did have an architect who was a remodeling architect. We had to upgrade the bathrooms and the kitchen, and we had to add the wood floor and do a lot of things like that interior-wise. So I did have an architect that I hired to help work with me to redesign the interior. The interior that exists now is very similar to the way it was originally. The walls have not been moved particularly. It's just more things of modernizing the interior.
And Job asked, and this was covered in the documentary, like, what is the significance of the cut corners? And what is the name of the gate again?
The gate is a Torii gate, T-O-R-I-I.
And the cut corners are design choice. Mary asked, how can I view this video again? It's been beautifully renovated. Thank you so much, Mary. Yes, so I'm going to, following this program, I'm going to be sending out like an email, like a follow-up email, which will have a link to it on YouTube. But also it will be live following this program on our YouTube channel. So that is where you can find it. And we're going to be working on getting this recording of this program on YouTube as well. You can watch it immediately on our Facebook page because it records live, or it records the live. But yeah. So what is the age of the home? So yeah, it was originally built in 1957. How long did it, this is from Sam. How long did it take to work out the details of the garden with the landscape architect? And do you have any particular favorite examples of Japanese gardens?
So I hired a landscape architect who actually is from Boston, lives in Boston. He did the Japanese garden at Hillwood, the Hillwood estate, which is not far from my house. There was an article in the Washington Post about the renovation of the Hillwood estate Japanese garden. And so I contacted him and asked him whether he'd be interested in doing my garden. And he came by to the house and saw the house and he said, yes, I definitely want to do the garden for you. So he designed, it was basically his design that he came up with. There were some minor tweaks to it. But every year, plants die and things need to be replanted. So the garden is an evolutionary thing.
We have a question from Jan. They ask, do you awake at sunrise because of the screens?
No, I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning because that's when the dog comes and jumps into my bed and wants to go outside to poo.
Oh yeah, so Carol asked again, and I believe Carol, Carol is from Palisades Village. Thank you so much, Carol, for joining us and for partnering with us. But Carol asked, I believe you have Japanese clients. Have you shared your home with them, and what is their reaction?
Yes, when I was practicing law, I had many Japanese clients. I've been to Japan many times. Whenever they would come to Washington, they would come over for drinks. Sometimes we had dinner for them here, and they just loved the house. We just used to hang around in the house and rather be at the house than be at the office.
And I think I remember from the hearing at HPRB, wasn't there a story of the Japanese embassy renting out your house as well?
So when the Bazelons lived in the house, the Japanese embassy did not have an appropriate Japanese room for a tea ceremony. And so the Bazelons gave permission for the Japanese embassy to conduct a tea ceremony in the house. There was an article in the, I think in the Washington Post or the Washington Star with photos of the geishas doing the tea ceremony in the living room, roughly 1960, 1961.
So Rob asks, what can you do or cannot do by the designation? And essentially, so because the exteriors are designated, you can't do anything like significantly that will change the character of the structure, like with other properties. But it doesn't mean that you can't do anything, right? So it usually just goes to the Historic Preservation Office and the Office of Planning. So if you want to do certain work, if there's like window work or certain work like that, you just go to them and you go through like the normal kind of permitting process. If in some cases, if they find that something is like being significantly done to the home that will really like destroy that character, they will then step in, maybe have a hearing of some sort. You'll talk to them, kind of go over some different ways that, okay, how can we adverse destroying the character of the home while still helping you kind of, if you need to like rehabilitate something, how can we? So it's a compromise, in some cases, but again, it's not that you can't do anything to fix up your home.
But basically, you can't tear it down.
Yeah, don't tear it down.
That's the key.
Yes, please don't tear it down. So yes, and let's see. Oh, thank you so much, Kate. So Kate commented, she goes, I'm a member of Palisades Village and I'm a longtime member of DCPL and the DC area historic preservation community. And she was delighted by this partnership. And thank you so much, Kate, for joining us today, for your kind words. Carol asked, I can't believe how many people were on your upper decks during the McGovern era. Can you imagine them doing that today?
No, but I've had parties of 50, 60 people in the house and with people on the deck, and it doesn't feel like it's very crowded. I've never had, hundreds of people like the McGoverns did, but I have had large groups of people in the house.
And Elliot asks, what is the, I think the construction of the roof? Flat roofs notoriously prone to leaking. And he said that you have made the house even more beautiful. So I guess I don't think the roof is 100% flat, but have you noticed like any issues with that kind of stuff, Gordon, like leaking, besides the sunroof, I think, right?
So the roof is tar and gravel. And I did have a leak a few months ago that I just had a minor repair to the roof on some of the slanted portion. There are some flat portions of the roof, particularly over the dining room area, but mostly it's a gabled roof. So the water kind of flows right off the roof.
And Kate asks, so how did you choose the kimono you have on display, and where did you acquire it? She loves Japanese textiles.
So the Japanese wedding kimono I acquired from Japan. There was a website which sold used wedding kimonos and other types of kimonos. And I just went to the website and picked out a kimono that I liked, thought it would look very nice in the house, and bought it, and they shipped it here. And then I had the person who made the furniture for me, he designed the stand for the kimono.
Great. So as we wait for other questions, I guess I have a question. So Gordon, as I mentioned, you approached DCPL in 2017 about getting your house designated. Maybe you can explain to folks what kind of made you come to that decision and why it interested you in doing this.
Well, I didn't want somebody to tear down the house. In my neighborhood, houses are being torn down right and left to build 3 and 4 story structures, which most of them are not very interesting architecturally. There's very little land now that these houses are so big, there's no yard. And I wanted to preserve the house. It had a unique history, both from the occupants and from the design standpoint. And I thought, if I can preserve the house for future generations, let me try to do that.
We thank you for that. And we thank you for your partnership. So David asked, have the extant McGovern children been back to visit the house?
None that I know of. If they have, they haven't knocked on the door when I was here. I have, when Mrs. Bazelon was alive, she was living in the Watergate when I bought the house. And when I had the house remodeled, I sent Mrs. Bazelon photos of the remodeled house and invited her to come by. And I talked to her on the phone about it, and she was very interested, but then decided the house was the past, and she wanted to look forward to the future, and did not come by. But I have an open invitation to the Bazelons to come visit the house. There are several granddaughters around, and there are 2 sons that are still living. So if they ever want to come by the house, they're very welcome to come by the house.
So Gloria asks, what is the square footage of the house and land?
So each floor is about 2,500 square feet. So total about 5,000 square feet. So it's not a very large house. It just looks large when you're inside the house because it's high ceilings and a lot of open rooms, big rooms. But it's not a very large house.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what was the other question? Well, there was another question about the lot size. It's about 1/3 of an acre.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and then Janice asks, are there tax benefits that come with the designation?
Not currently. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, not currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and honestly, I'm not an expert enough to talk about this particularly, but Janice, I can always, or anybody who's interested, you're free to email us, and I can get you more information about that kind of stuff. Or you can visit the Historic Preservation Office, and there could be more information there. There are certain tax incentives for certain properties.
In theory, the value of the property should be less now that it's historically designated, because somebody cannot tear down the house and build a $5 million house on top of this lot. So in theory, the value of the lot and the house should be less. but from a practical standpoint, the DC government does not take that into account. And so every year my property taxes go up. Particularly when the houses next door to me are now $5 or $6 million houses. My property is viewed to be more valuable, even though they can't tear down the house.
That is rough. Carol asked, was the home air conditioned when you bought it?
Yes.
Just gonna check and see, do we have any questions from Facebook? Oh, I think we got another question. No Facebook question. So Sally commented, you know, that the average American house could be up to 2,300 square feet. So your house could be considered large, I guess.
Not in my neighborhood.
No, yeah, looking at the neighborhood.
Yeah, in my neighborhood, houses are like 8,000, 9,000 square foot houses.
Yeah. So definitely need to look at your neighbors. And then Jan said, what a gorgeous retreat you have. Thanks so much for sharing it with us. Thank you so much, Gordon. Oh, I think we have another question. Kate asks, would you like to borrow my Japanese Akita dog for any future photo ops?
I have a Portuguese water dog who is sleeping right next to me.
Oh,
One dog's enough. His name happens to be Buddha, so he goes with the house.
Cute. Oh, that's very cute. I think I met Buddha when I had visited a while back. So yeah, so David asked, how many owners were there between the McGoverns and you?
Just one. So I'm the fourth owner. There was the Bazelons, the McGoverns, the Lees, which was a Korean family, and I bought it from Mrs. Lee, who lived in the house for several years after her husband died, and then she moved up to New York to be with her children.
So as I'll give it a moment, see if there's any other questions, but I'm going to put a few links in the chat, everybody. So I have the Palisades Village website if you'd like to learn more about them. I also have the nomination form for the property, a link to that as well, and that includes more information about the house, about the architecture, its significance. And then I also just, you know, I have the hearing recording from HPRB. So that was recorded, and you're more than welcome to watch that if you would like, if you weren't able to see it live. You can see the presentation, you can see Gordon's part in that presentation where he talks a little bit more about the house, and some interesting conversation about, yeah, like Palisades, the other modernist houses in the neighborhood, and kind of, as Gordon was mentioning, the raising of some of these properties. So it was pretty interesting to tune into.
And there's also a lot about the architect in the historic application. So if anybody is interested to know more about this architect, you can find a lot in the application.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't get too much into it, but yeah, that's definitely read up on him as well. And Carol said, thank you for preserving your fantastic home and inviting us to visit it. And thank you so much, Carol. And again, Palisades Village for partnering with us. And then I'm also just going to put our info in DCPL. Yeah, if you have any other questions that maybe we didn't get, maybe you think of after the fact, or anything else about the program, we have our email address here, info@dcpreservation.org, and you can email us any questions that you all might have. I'm not seeing any other questions. Let me just give it a sec. Okay. Let's see. Okay, well, again, if you think of anything, just reach out to us. But anyway, thank you. Oh, wait, I think we have some questions, actually. Marjorie asks, is it possible to see the house in person? It is a private residence, but Gordon, I'll let you answer this.
Yeah, you can't see it in person if you're vaccinated.
Okay, there you go.
If you like dogs. If you like dogs and you're vaccinated, you can come see the house.
And Kate commented, I congratulate you on your sensitivity and care for and of your beautiful abode. Marjorie said she is vaccinated, but do you like dogs, Marjorie? That was also one of the requirements. gonna give it really like solid, right? Oh, and I have my cat, her dog and jumped on the table. So, okay. Well, anyway, thank you again so much, Gordon, not only for inviting us into your home today and for taking us on this tour, but also again, for working with us to create the nomination and also for your stewardship of the property and your enthusiasm for getting it designated. Again, like I mentioned, it's always exciting when we have a homeowner who is so enthusiastic for saving this property and working with us. It's always exciting. And again, like I mentioned, this tour will be available on YouTube. I'm going to email everybody following this for feedback, but then also if you just visit our YouTube page, it should be up by this evening if you would like to rewatch it. And then we'll have the full program up soon as well. And so before we officially end things here, I just want to remind everybody to be on the lookout for what we have planned this month. As part of our 50th anniversary celebration, we're highlighting parks and gardens throughout May. And our next program is actually going to be a presentation from Consigli Construction about their current rehabilitation project in Meridian Hill Park. So we hope that you will join us for that. That is taking place next week, next Wednesday. And you can learn more about that event and others on our website. Again, I encourage you to take a look at those resources I shared with you all about the nomination form and the hearing. And we hope that you enjoy your weekend and the rest of the day. A big thank you again to Gordon and to the Palisades Village for partnering with us. And we look forward to seeing you all at future DCPL programs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.